Every town has a legend, and ours was the house on Ridgeview Road. It sat at the edge of the woods, a hulking, decaying structure that no one wanted to get close to, much less enter. For as long as I could remember, it had been the source of countless ghost stories. They said it was cursed, that the family who once lived there had vanished without a trace one stormy night. Some people claimed to have seen lights in the windows, shadows moving inside, even though it had been abandoned for decades. But I didn't believe in ghosts. At least, I didn't until the night I went inside. It was early December, my last year of high school, and a group of us had decided to hang out at my friend Eric's house. It was cold that night, with a biting wind that made us grateful for the roaring fire in Eric's living room. The conversation drifted to ghost stories, and naturally, someone brought up the house on Ridgeview Road. "You wouldn't last 5 minutes in there," Eric said, smirking at me. "Please," I scoffed. "It's just an old house. I bet it's full of squirrels and mold, not ghosts." "Prove it," he said, leaning forward. "Go inside. Spend the night. We'll even pay you $50. The others chimed in, egging me on. I should have said no, but my pride got the better of me. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." The next night, just before sunset, Eric drove me to the house. The others came along, too, packed into the back of his truck like it was some kind of field trip. The house looked even worse up close. The windows were shattered, the siding was warped and peeling, and the roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. The air smelled damp and earthy like something rotting. "Good luck," Eric said, handing me a flashlight. "We'll be back at sunrise. Try not to scream too loud." I rolled my eyes and climbed out of the truck, my breath fogging in the cold air. As they drove away, I felt a twinge of doubt. But it was too late to back out now. The front door was swollen with moisture, but I managed to force it open with a loud creak. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, thick with the scent of mildew. My flashlight beam swept across the entryway, revealing faded wallpaper, broken furniture, and cobwebs draped like curtains. The house was deathly silent, except for the occasional groan of the floorboards under my feet. I decided to set up in the living room, where an old couch and a crumbling fireplace offered the illusion of comfort. I unrolled my sleeping bag and sat down, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. For the first hour, nothing happened. I texted Eric to let him know I was fine, then spent some time scrolling on my phone. But as the battery started to drain, I became acutely aware of how dark and quiet the house was. Then I heard it, a soft thump coming from upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It could have been anything, an animal, a branch hitting the roof, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded deliberate, like a footstep. I shined my flashlight toward the staircase, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the beam revealed only dust motes floating in the air. I told myself it was just the house settling, and went back to my sleeping bag. A little after midnight, I decided to explore. Staying in one spot was making me paranoid, and I figured it would be easier to pass the time if I kept moving. I started with the first floor, peeking into what used to be a dining room, a kitchen, and a study. Each room was more decrepit than the last, with broken furniture and peeling wallpaper. In the study, something caught my eye, writing scrawled on the wall in faded, uneven letters. "Leave now." I stared at it, my stomach churning. It could have been a prank, kids breaking in and trying to scare people. But the handwriting didn't look like a kid's. It was shaky, almost frantic. I went upstairs, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The hallway was lined with doors, most of them open, revealing empty, crumbling rooms. At the end of the hall was a bathroom. The door was ajar, and as I approached, I noticed something strange. The mirror above the sink was intact. In a house where everything else was broken or decayed, the mirror was pristine, its surface gleaming in the flashlight beam. I stepped inside, my breath fogging the glass as I leaned closer. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale. But then, for a split second, I saw something else, someone standing behind me. I whipped around, but the room was empty. I decided I'd had enough of the upstairs and made my way back down. As I passed the basement door, I noticed it was slightly open, revealing a staircase descending into pitch blackness. Something about that open door felt wrong, like it was daring me to go down there. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer, shining my flashlight into the void. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing faintly. There was no response, but as I turned to leave, I heard it again, that same soft thump, this time coming from the basement. I stood there, torn between curiosity and fear. Finally, I steeled myself and descended the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps making my heart race. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of damp earth filled my nose. At the bottom, my flashlight illuminated a large, empty space with concrete walls. It looked like no one had been down there in years. But in the far corner, something caught my attention, a pile of objects covered in a dirty tarp. I approached cautiously and pulled the tarp away. Beneath it were old photographs, toys, and clothing, all of it covered in dust. But the strangest part was a diary lying on top, its leather cover cracked and brittle. I opened it, flipping through pages filled with messy, desperate handwriting. One entry stood out. "They're watching. They're always watching. Don't stay after dark." As I read, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, echoing softly through the basement. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the room. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, the beam of my flashlight landed on the far wall, and I saw them. Handprints. Dozens of them, smeared across the concrete, as if people had been clawing at the wall, trying to get out. I bolted up the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I reached the first floor, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, fast and relentless. I didn't dare look back. I ran for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was rusted, the wood swollen shut. Panic surged through me as the footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned to face whatever was coming, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. But there was nothing there, just the empty, decaying house. And then, the whispering started again, louder this time, surrounding me. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the yard, gasping for air, my flashlight still clutched in my trembling hand. Eric's truck was pulling up the driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. "Dude, are you okay?" Eric asked as I climbed into the truck, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could think about was the whispering, the handprints, and the feeling that something had followed me out of that house. I never went back to Ridgeview Road. But sometimes late at night, I hear it, the faint sound of whispers just outside my window. When I was 17, my family moved to a quiet suburb in upstate New York. It wasn't one of those picturesque neighborhoods with white picket fences and manicured lawns. The houses were older, spaced far apart, and lined by dense woods that stretched for miles. At the very end of our street, there was a house that no one seemed to talk about. It was dilapidated, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. The yard was overgrown, and the mailbox hung open, its rusted hinges barely holding on. My mom told me it had been abandoned for years, but every time I walked past it, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from inside. One Friday night, a few weeks after we moved in, my friends Jake and Mia came over. Jake was the kind of guy who thrived on dares, always trying to prove he wasn't afraid of anything. When the conversation turned to the creepy house at the end of the street, he grinned. "Let's go check it out," he said. I hesitated, but Mia was on board immediately. I didn't want to seem like a coward, so I agreed. We grabbed flashlights and headed down the street. The night was cold, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. When we reached the house, Jake pushed open the rusted gate with a loud screech. "Ladies first," he joked, gesturing to the front door. The inside was worse than I expected. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of mildew and something metallic I couldn't place. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the floor creaked with every step. In the living room, there was an old couch with its stuffing spilling out, and a pile of newspapers yellowed with age. A single wooden chair sat in the corner, facing a blank wall. It looked like someone had just left it there mid-sentence. "This isn't so bad," Jake said, kicking a beer can across the floor. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The shadows seemed darker than they should have been, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from somewhere deeper in the house. We explored the first floor, finding nothing but broken furniture and trash. Then we came to the basement door. It was slightly ajar, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. "No way," Mia said, backing away. Jake laughed. "Come on, it's just a basement. What's the worst that could happen?" He turned on his flashlight and started down the stairs. I glanced at Mia, who looked pale, and then followed him. The steps groaned under our weight, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, The basement was almost completely empty, except for a large wooden chest in the corner. It was covered in deep scratches, and the padlock on it had been broken. Jake was immediately drawn to the chest. "Let's see what's inside," he said, grinning. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, my voice shaky. But Jake ignored me. He grabbed the lid and lifted it with a grunt. Inside were several items: a tattered doll with one eye missing, a bundle of old photographs, and what looked like a leather-bound journal. Mia reached for the journal and flipped it open. The handwriting was jagged and hard to read, but one phrase stood out: "Do not wake it." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake laughed. "Probably just some creepy old story." He picked up the doll and dangled it in front of us. "Oh, spooky." That's when we heard it, a loud thud from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen. We all froze, our eyes darting toward the staircase. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, though he didn't sound as confident as before. Mia grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." "Now?" I nodded, but Jake insisted on checking it out. "What if it's just some animal? We can't leave without making sure." Reluctantly, we followed him back upstairs. The house was eerily silent again, but the living room chair had moved. It was now facing the hallway. "I swear it wasn't like that before," Mia said, her voice trembling. Jake led the way up the stairs to the second floor, his flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. The hallway was lined with several doors, all closed. "Hello!" Jake called out, his voice echoing. We waited, holding our breath. Nothing. Jake shrugged and opened the first door. It was a small bedroom, empty except for a bed frame and a cracked mirror. One by one, he opened the other doors. Most of the rooms were the same, empty, decaying. But the last door was locked. Jake jiggled the handle. "There's got to be something interesting in here." He threw his shoulder against the door, and it burst open. Inside, the room was bare except for a small table in the center. On it sat a single candle, unlit, and a photograph in a cracked frame. I picked up the photo and felt my stomach drop. It was of the three of us, Jake, Mia, and me, standing in front of the house. But it wasn't possible. We had never taken that photo. Before we could process what we were seeing, the door slammed shut behind us. The flashlight beams flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. "Did you close the door?" Mia whispered. "No," Jake said, his voice shaking. And then we saw it, a shadow moving across the wall, stretching unnaturally long. It wasn't coming from us. "Run!" I shouted. Jake fumbled with the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The shadow began to take shape, growing larger and more defined. It looked human, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its face was featureless, just a void of darkness. Mia screamed, and Jake threw himself against the door, breaking it open. We bolted down the stairs, the shadow chasing us, its movements jagged and unnatural. As we reached the front door, it slammed shut on its own. Jake yanked at it, but it wouldn't move. "Back door!" I shouted. We sprinted through the kitchen and out the back door, not stopping until we were halfway down the street. When we finally turned back, the house was dark and still. Jake bent over, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I said, shaking. "But we're never going back." We didn't talk about the house after that night. We didn't even tell anyone what happened. But strange things started happening. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see shadows moving in my room. Mia stopped answering my calls, and when I finally went to her house, her parents said she had moved away without telling anyone. Jake wasn't so lucky. A week after the incident, he was found dead in his room. The official cause was a heart attack, but his face was frozen in an expression of pure terror. As for me, I moved away as soon as I could. But sometimes, I swear I can feel it watching me, the shadow from that house, waiting for the right moment to return.